Hello, folks, and welcome back to 10-Minute Elections. Today is Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020, and this video, in place of a State of the Day episode, will be a continuation of Monday's Senate map overview. So, on Monday, to recap, we went from Alaska to Minnesota and Iowa, covering the seats there. So today we'll pick up where we left off in Alabama and work our way up to Maine, classifying seats along the way. So we'll start there in Alabama, ruby red Alabama, and one of the three most conservative states in the Union according to presidential election lean, along with West Virginia and Wyoming, both of which we see have safe Republican Senate elections this cycle, but not Alabama. So, Democratic incumbent Doug Jones in 2017 won his special election by about a point over Republican Supreme Court Justice in Alabama, Roy Moore. Now, Moore was embattled, to say the least, and this was one of the low points for Trump's approval rating. So, a large mixture of factors came together to squeak Jones into the Senate from Alabama, but his re-election prospects look fairly bleak. He will take on one of two GOP challengers, either the favorite to win his primary, former Alabama head football coach Tommy Tuberville, or former Republican senator from Alabama and U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who is now attempting to win his seat back. So, seeing as this is a presidential election year, Donald Trump will handily carry this state. Whoever the Republican nominee is will certainly not have the disapproval rating of Roy Moore. This seat should flip back to the GOP, especially considering that Doug Jones hasn't really bucked his party on enough key votes to garner really enough support across party lines to win the election, and you have to do a lot of that when you're a Democrat in Alabama. Moving over now to the state of Georgia, two elections here. First, the regular Senate election, where GOP incumbent David Perdue attempts to be reelected to another term in the U.S. Senate. The special election that seat is currently held by Kelly Loeffler of the GOP. She was appointed by Georgia Governor Brian Kemp to replace retiring Republican Senator Johnny Isakson. So, the winner of the special election will serve until 2022 when that seat goes up for election again. But for the regular Senate election, it's going to be David Perdue against Democrat Jon Ossoff, who nearly won a red House district in 2018, just like MJ Hegar in Texas and Amy McGrath in Kentucky, which we'll get to in a minute. So, just because David Perdue is not particularly unpopular, I'm going to rate this race as a lightly Republican. It should vote right of the presidential election in Georgia, Georgia being a lean Republican state. There is certainly an argument here to classify this race as lean Republican. Jon Ossoff is a strong candidate, but ultimately this is certainly David Perdue's race to lose. The special election is going to be more interesting. This one is what's called a jungle primary, meaning all of the candidates from both parties run in the same race and are all on the ballot in the November election. If no one gets a majority, which no one is expected to get a majority in the November election, because in both parties the vote will be split two ways, the top two will advance to a January runoff election to determine the winner. So on the GOP side, we have Kelly Loeffler as well as and Georgia Representative Doug Collins. On the Democratic side, we have DSCC endorsed Pastor Raphael Warnock and Matt Lieberman. Recognize that last name? So, ultimately, this race is a lean Republican by the lean of the state, but this is really an estimate, and it's not going to be as accurate as some of the other projections because special elections really do have a mind of their own. Look at Alabama in 2017. Look at Massachusetts a few years back, Scott Brown. So, special elections, we see all sorts of crazy margins, and JHK projects that this race could actually go GOP by over 25 points or go Democrat by over 10. All right, moving up to the state of Kentucky, Mitch McConnell attempts to defend his incumbency against Democratic former fighter pilot and 2018 House candidate Amy McGrath. Now, this race, just like in 2014, where McConnell looked to actually be vulnerable, judging by his unpopularity, but was able to win convincingly. This is a race where Amy McGrath has been shown to be very, very competitive in the polls, actually leading Mitch McConnell here and there. But ultimately, if the national GOP judges the seat to be in danger, they will pour funds into it to make sure the leader keeps his seat. And another thing we've also talked about, we talk a lot about where each party's path to the majority runs through. The Democratic path to the majority does not run through Mitch McConnell's seat. It does not run through the seat in Kentucky. So they could make this seat competitive if they wanted to, but frankly, they probably have better things to do with their money. Okay, 4 more seats to classify now, and we'll start with the state of Michigan. Gary Peters looks to defend his incumbency against rising GOP star John James. So in 2018, Debbie Stabenow ran against John James in that Senate election. And although Stabenow is slightly more approved of than Peters, their disapproval numbers are nearly identical, and Stabenow won that race by double digits, about 11 points. So the voters of Michigan have already rejected John James once, very similar to the situation we see in Arizona now. So, especially in what's projected to be a very moderate blue wave year, and Donald Trump is very unpopular, we should see Gary Peters hold on to his seat, although not by a large margin, because if a GOP candidate will win the seat, it's probably John James. The problem for John James is a GOP candidate probably won't win this seat. Really the same situation as in, say, Texas. So, with that classified as lean Democratic, and it could either vote left or right of where the state is on the presidential level, we move down into North Carolina, where generally unpopular Republican Senator Thom Tillis attempts to defend his seat against Democratic State Senator Cal Cunningham. Now, Cunningham is a moderate, and the state and national Democratic parties should be thanking their lucky stars that he won his primary, because if the progressive challenger against him had upset him in his primary, this seat would probably not be nearly as competitive, and the GOP would have a significant edge. So, seeing as Cunningham is the nominee, and this is really a low point for the national GOP with everything going on right now, I'm going to rate this race actually as a as a tilt Democrat, and I think it will vote left of where it goes on the presidential level. Certainly a race to keep an eye on, and this will almost certainly be one of the races that decides control of the Senate, and it will almost certainly be one of the narrowest margins across the board. 2 more races, and we'll start up here with New Hampshire. We have Democratic incumbent Jeanne Shaheen running in her first re-election bid, and Jeanne Shaheen, as well as Maggie Hassan, the state's 2 Democratic senators, are both very popular and have cruised to re-election in years past, especially with respect to the latter. So a lot of folks have actually been rating this race as safe Democrat, and it could very well eclipse that 15% threshold. New Hampshire and Maine tend to vote fairly independently of their presidential leans on the senatorial level, but I'm going to, simply because the state is so close on the presidential level, I'm going to rate this state as a likely Democrat, but Shaheen should certainly hold on to her seat. The state of Maine. We discussed this last Wednesday in the State of the Day covering Maine. Susan Collins and Maine Speaker of the House Sarah Gideon. And this is a race where Susan Collins is going to struggle really because, firstly, although I talked about New Hampshire and Maine as exceptions, states across the board have been aligning their Senate and president votes more and more. And also, as I discussed on Wednesday, the tax, impeachment, and Kavanaugh votes, all 3 of those specifically, are going to really be hurting Susan Collins in Maine. So, Maine is a blue state, not a swing state, not a toss-up state. Maine is a blue state. The reason Susan Collins has gone back to the Senate so many times is because she's popular and independent-minded, but so much of that has been sapped now with her going from the most to least approved of senator in the nation. Sarah Gideon is not at all a bad candidate, and for that reason, I rate this race as a tilt Democratic. So that puts the Republicans at 50 and the Democrats at 50, meaning under this projection, the vice president will decide control of the chamber. Okay, thank you guys for watching. Of course, this changes all the time, so I'll be coming out with new videos specifically about Joe Biden's prospective running mates on Friday. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you then.